Symphony No. 5 in D minor, Opus 47, 1937. Shostakovich managed to scratch out a living in 1936 and 1937, but it was by no means an easy thing to do. By 1937, no new work of his had been presented to the public in over 2 years. It was under these extraordinary circumstances that Shostakovich was expected to compose his Fifth Symphony, his make-or-break work, the composition that would either rehabilitate him or seal his doom. You want to talk about work-related pressure? This makes hitting a baseball in the bottom of the ninth inning seem like child's play. Anyway, Shostakovich's life was at stake, and everybody knew it. The premiere of Shostakovich's Fifth took place on November 21st, 1937. Shostakovich later described the scene, and we quote, "The atmosphere at the premiere was highly charged. The hall was filled, as they say, with all the best and all the worst people as well. It was definitely a critical situation, and not only for me. Which way would the official wind blow? That's what was worrying members of the select audience, people in literature, culture, and music. During the first half of the program, Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet was performed. My Fifth was on the second half of the program. I felt like a little fish in a frying pan. I remembered Oleynikov's ditty, tiny little fishy, fried little smelt. Where is your smile from yesterday? Remember how you felt?" Unquote. The symphony had the following statement written across its title page: "The creative reply of a Soviet artist to just criticism." Oh, my friends, we must again recall composer Benjamin Basner's previous statement. It is difficult to imagine what fear and trembling we lived through. We should therefore discount the statements that he signed. We knew that they were meaningless acts to him, but served as a public shield. Indeed, immediately before the premiere of the symphony in 1936, Shostakovich's Fifth was performed for a small number of party select who were there to determine its ideological suitability. Towing the party line, Shostakovich wrote 3 years later in 1940, quote, "I can still remember the joy I felt when my newly finished Fifth Symphony was heard by an audience of party activists from the Leningrad branch. I should like to express my wish that the previewing of new works of music by a party audience be practiced more often. Our party devotes great care and attention to the development of our country's musical life. I have felt this concern all through my life." Unquote. Makes you want to gag, doesn't it? Shostakovich's statement is yet another example of what Martin Cooper calls foam in the mouth of a man forced to eat soap. Shostakovich's friend and colleague, the soprano Galina Vishnevskaya, later the wife of Mstislav Rostropovich, described the same party audition in words intended for private, not public consumption. And I quote, "Before the Fifth Symphony was allowed to be performed, it was heard by the party active in Leningrad. A few dozen nincompoops together to judge a genius, to make objections, to lecture him, and in general to teach him how to write music. He had tried to save his newborn from their talons, but how? He tried to deceive them in the most rudimentary way, and he succeeded. All he had to do was use other words to describe the huge complex of human passions and suffering that is so apparent in his music. He described his music to the party as joyous and optimistic, and the entire pack dashed off satisfied." The brief program note indicated that the symphony constituted, for Shostakovich, quote, "a lengthy spiritual battle crowned by victory." Well, let's hear that crowning victorious moment, the last minute and a half of Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. Witnesses later recalled that men and women wept openly during the third movement. As the last movement progressed, the audience began to rise to their feet, one by one. And as the last notes sounded, pandemonium erupted from the audience. The conductor, Evgeny Mravinsky, waved the score over his head. One member of the audience, Lyubov Vasilyevna Shaporina, wrote in her diary, and we quote, "The whole audience leapt to their feet and erupted in wild applause, a demonstration of their outrage at all the hounding poor Mitya had been through. Everybody kept saying the same thing. That was his answer, and it was a good one. Shostakovich came out on stage, white as a sheet, biting his lips. I think he was close to tears," unquote. Mstislav Rostropovich said of that night in November of 1937, and I quote, "The applause went on for an entire hour. People were in an uproar and ran up and down through the streets of Leningrad till the small hours, embracing and congratulating each other on having been there. They had understood the message of the Fifth Symphony, the message of sorrow, of suffering and isolation. Stretched on the rack of the Inquisition, the victim still tries to smile in his pain. The shrill repetitions of the A at the end of the symphony are to me like a spear point jabbing in the wounds of a person on the rack. The hearers of the first performance could identify with that person. Anybody who thinks the finale is glorification is an idiot," unquote. Clearly, the first night audience there in Leningrad knew from the very beginning that the symphony was about the Great Terror. No matter how Shostakovich sugar-coated his statements for the benefit of the authorities, the audience's perspective, their empathy, their understanding of the circumstances under which the symphony was created allowed them to understand the work in a way that we today generally do not and perhaps cannot. One first-night listener wrote that the opening of the fourth and last movement is, quote, "the iron tread of a monstrous power trampling humanity." Alexander Fedyaev wrote in his diary, and I quote, "The end does not sound like an outcome or even less like a triumph or victory, but like punishment or revenge," unquote. Kind of changes the way we hear the symphony, does it not? Of course, certain members of the Western musical community did not get it at all. Many Western writers and critics belittled Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony as a concession to political pressure, as empty Soviet bombast. Their insensitivity was as appalling as their abject ignorance. We say to those Western writers and critics, spend a year, a month, a day in Shostakovich's shoes, then come back and tell us what the Fifth Symphony is all about. Hey, I'll tell you what it's all about. It's a magnificent, abstract, incredibly personal work that brilliantly straddles the line between accessibility and personal compositional integrity. And it is music that has stood the test of time, despite whatever immediate political ends it served. So, Shostakovich was officially rehabilitated. Great. He even issued a statement indicating his joy at being accepted back into the fold of the Soviet cultural family. And we quote, "There is nothing more honorable for a composer than to create works for and with the people. The composer who forgets about his high obligation loses the right to his high calling. The attention to music on the part of our government and all the Soviet people instills in me the confidence that I will be able to give everything that is in my power," unquote. Again, this statement reflects the public Shostakovich, the one who was vindicated and rehabilitated. Privately, of course, his fear and loathing of Stalin and the Soviet bureaucracy never, ever left him. By the end of his life, the weight of his memories and his bitterness had grown to extraordinary proportions.